everyone. Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today I have Ryan on with us. And Ryan just recently finished going through the summer 2022 recruiting process and was able to get a very successful outcome. And so I wanted to get him on here to talk about kind of his journey with us over the last 5 to 6 months or so, and just how everything went down, and also have him, share some insights with you guys that hopefully will help you with your own recruiting process as well. So Ryan, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, man.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. As a non-traditional finance student, I didn't have a finance major, and I went to a semi-target school and really had limited finance experience on my resume. So I really found Wall Street Mastermind to be really helpful in my journey for recruiting.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go back to the beginning. When did you first realize that you wanted to pursue investment banking? Was it pretty early on, or kind of late, or?
Yeah, I'd say it was kind of late, actually. So I started recruiting this year, the same year. I just went to a couple of the meetings for the finance clubs on campus, and I became really interested in what the finance world was, and specifically investment banking, since that's the most common way that most of my upperclassmen were talking about the finance industry. And from there it was kind of just a roller coaster.
Yeah. What do you remember, roughly? Because that's sometime during sophomore year, I assume. It was just when you made this discovery. Was that first semester sophomore year, second semester sophomore year, halfway through sophomore year?
Definitely second semester sophomore year. That's when I joined all the finance clubs on campus and really became involved.
Okay, got it. So second semester sophomore year. So that's, I guess, by the time you had realized, probably a lot of the elite boutiques and the bulge bracket banks had already started recruiting, their applications are open and whatnot, right? Because nowadays, for your class, summer 2020, the people that recruited for summer 2022, I remember a bunch of them opened up in January. It was January 15th of sophomore year. So it was basically everything was happening in real time by the time you had decided that, oh, this is something I want to pursue. But you hadn't started doing any preparation or whatnot yet. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the time metric I like to use was that by the time I hit the ground running, RBC had already closed their application. So I really had to, get to grinding and pursuing this thing if I really wanted to get at it.
Yeah. RBC is just madness. They always, last year they started November, I think. Last year I think they opened in November, and then this year, was it September? I forgot. It was
super early.
Yeah, it was super early. But they're always the first bank to open up months before everyone else, and then they kind of freak everyone out, and
right.
And then the other banks start to slowly open up their applications usually a month or two after RBC. And they did that again this year too. They were the first one to open summer 2023 applications, and it was just everyone's always wait, what? It's already open. Anyway, those guys. So okay, so you start pretty late, and then what were you doing then? How did you go about the preparation process prior to you joining Wall Street Mastermind? What were some of the things that you were doing on your own?
Yeah, I'd say it was kind of just a mishmash of multiple things. So obviously recruiting for investment banking is a very multifaceted process. You have to network, you have to teach yourself a lot of the different actual technical material and knowledge. You also have to get familiar with what sector of finance you really want to go into. And so all of that was kind of happening simultaneously in real time. And I really had no sense of direction as to, how to go about best networking and teaching myself all of these, especially as a full-time college student when, more than half of my schedule was already blocked out.
Yeah, exactly. So was that just were you just talking to people in your finance clubs, talking to upperclassmen? Were you I don't know, reading the Breaking into Wall Street guys? How do you do some of these things? How do you figure this stuff out? I know it was very sounds like it was very hectic and unorganized, and maybe you felt you needed more structure, but what were some of the resources you were using though?
Yeah, so definitely, like you mentioned, the Breaking into Wall Street guides, those are, available online. And then also just kind of poking at the brains of upperclassmen and trying to get any coffee chats that I could, trying to grab at, every opportunity that came my way. But really, I think, it was sort of like such a sporadic process, like I said. And so like, it was really, really chaotic in a sense.
And I mean, like you mentioned, you go to a semi-target school. So like, are there a lot of upperclassmen at your school that go into banking, or like, do you know like roughly how many students you guys send into banking each year?
Relative to other schools, like it's not that many, but the ones that we do send are very passionate about finance. And, it's a very small portion of the population I would see here. But, the people that really do want to work in finance really are passionate about it and are willing to help out people that want to start in the industry.
Got it. Okay. So I guess what made you decide to join Wall Street Mastermind then? Because I know you joined us at like the end of May, which was probably like right after your final exams had ended for sophomore year or something, and summer just started, right? So like, what made you decide to join Wall Street Mastermind at that point in time?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I was just on Google one day and I found one of your advertisements, actually on YouTube, and one of the testimonial videos, and that caught my attention right away because I saw one of my upperclassmen friends who was actually part of the program, one of your former clients, and I was really kind of interested to hear what he had to say about the program. So I hit him up, and he really attested to the validity and legitimacy of this program. And I decided to obviously book that strategy call with you. And from then I was sold. It was just a matter of starting with you guys and hitting the ground running in a more efficient way.
Got it. Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. Name starts with a K, right?
Yep.
So got it. So basically just like, because you knew someone that had already gone through the program personally, it gave you a lot more confidence that it's a good program, basically. Okay. Because I was going to ask, like, there's a lot of noise online around whether this program is legitimate or not. Does it actually do what it says it's going to do? Is it a scam? Blah, blah, blah. Which I understand, because there are a lot of like programs online that are very scammy and don't really deliver on what they say. But
right.
Sounds like you weren't really too concerned about all that just because you had this personal connection then.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, especially in this online age of like, where people could be snake oil salesmen, you really have to do a lot of research for yourself and, probing. And so, especially if you're passionate about something as intense as investment banking, recruiting, so not only his testimony, but also, speaking with you and the recruiters on the team, I really wanted to make sure for myself that it was a legit program and, it all checked out.
Yeah, makes sense. So you came in the program end of sophomore year. At that point, did you have like a sophomore summer internship lined up or anything like that? Or what was like the situation you were in from like a resume standpoint?
Yeah, so before that, I really had limited finance experience. I was working for like this what one would call like a veterinary roll-up, I found actually on searchfunder.com. But that was pretty much it. And that was limited finance experience.
Yeah.
And so, I would say I was really excited to join the program mainly because, I know you have proven methods that, allow students to get these summer internships and build up their resume.
Yeah. So then like take us from, end of May, beginning of June to, I guess, you got your offer, early December, right? Well, you got an offer earlier than that, but you got like the final offer that you decided to accept early December, which was, we'll talk more about that later, but, but like, take us through those like 5 or 6 months in between. Like, what were some of the things that you did inside of the program with us, and like, what did you find to be, I guess, the most helpful? And also, I think like the question that people always ask, people who haven't been in the program from the outside looking in, I think is naturally like, what's the difference? Like, you're just doing the same stuff that we're doing anyway, right? You got to network, you got to learn your behaviorals, you got to learn your technicals, right? You got to work on your resume. Like, it's all the same stuff. So like, what's the difference versus in terms of what you did with us versus like what you would have just done on your own or could have just done on your own?
Right. So immediately, once I got into the program and got everything set up, I directly went into the modules and started, listening to what you had to say about how to best network, how to best, teach yourself the technical modules. And this analogy I like to use is that, sure, you could buy like $100 textbook, right? But, it's no use without the professor explaining and giving context to the information and giving you a sense of direction. So in that sense, you kind of, this program and you specifically gave me a sense of direction about how to best go about all of these different things involved in the recruiting process. And so, yeah, in tandem with all of those modules that I was looking at on a daily basis, there were weekly office hours. And so if I ever had a question about anything, I could go and ask you that. And also, the personal chats that we always have that you guys are always available to answer questions at, always through questions in those. And also, just the community of established clients that we already have, so we feed off of each other's energies, and really, it's a really collaborative and inclusive community. And so having that, I guess to say Wolfpack behind me was really helpful. A sense of camaraderie, I guess. Definitely I would say, apart from like the more, physical stuff that I was doing, it was definitely an emotional roller coaster, because by the time I become into the program, a lot of my peers had already signed with boutiques and, some Bulge brackets as well. And I was really, starting to doubt myself. But I would say, throughout all this, it's like, you have to keep your head strong, and you have to keep your head up. The number one battle is with yourself and your sense of self-doubt. But really being in this program allowed me to, I think, take, manageable and tangible steps to actually combat that. And so by September, that was when I actually started getting invites for interviews. I remember, the first time I got an interview for Morgan Stanley, I told you, and I was like super happy because I didn't think this day would ever come. But from then on, all of that grinding had been worth it, because over the summer, it was pretty much like a dry spell, in my opinion. Like, I wasn't getting feedback from employers and these applications that I had submitted. But by the time that did happen in September, I was already prepared because of the modules and because of all the training that I had gone through in the program. And so it was pretty much like just a quick succession of events. So like you said, I got an earlier offer in October, but ultimately the final offer did come in December, which I was really happy about and ended up signing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you bring up a good point there, which is just like, you joined at the very end of May, pretty much couldn't really start on stuff until June, right? And then,
right.
The first interview you got was September, right? And so it took about 3 months. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is that, sure, sometimes you might get an interview right away, but like the way investment banking recruiting works is like there's a lot of lead time involved in terms of like the stuff you have to do to kind of like, it's like building a house. You got to lay the foundation first, before you can do everything else. And like what you were doing earlier on in those first 2 to 3 months is like you had to, sure, submit a lot of applications, but like you had to like really go out and network with a bunch of people, and like networking takes time, right? And it's not like the first person you network with is it's not that easy. It's like, oh, every person you talk to is going to help you. Like a lot of times you have to go through a lot of people, and in the beginning when you're first networking, you're probably not as good at it, right? And so those conversations aren't as fruitful. But you do more and more reps, and then eventually it becomes easier, and you start having better conversations, and then all of a sudden like the floodgates open, and then, like the interviews start coming in, right? And so people are always like, oh, like, I want to, like, we run into this a lot where people are like, I'm going to try out my own first and see if it works. And then like, if it doesn't work, then I'll come back in like 6 months. And I'm like, okay, but like the recruiting window is only like a few months. Like if you try for 6 months and it doesn't work and you come back, first of all, like the remaining window that's open is much smaller. There are a lot fewer firms left. All the top firms have finished recruiting. And then once we get our hands on you, like we still might need to spend like, a month or 2 months or 3 months just to like really fix everything that you're doing wrong and lay the groundwork. And then like, by then, who knows, you might run out of time, right? So it's just like taking that lead time into account. I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't realize is like banking recruiting happens so quickly. It's like you have to have like a sense of urgency of just like a lot of people. I mean, it's kind of crazy. If we rewind back to the beginning of this interview where you said like, oh yeah, I decided, halfway through my sophomore year that I wanted to do investment banking. I was late to the process. Like, if you just listen to that statement, it's kind of absurd, right? Like,
Right.
you decided on what you want to do for your career halfway through sophomore year. That's like 2.5 years before you're going to graduate.
That's crazy. Yeah.
But like for any other industry, people would be like, oh wow, this guy really has his shit together, and like, he's like ahead of the
Right.
curve or whatever. But like for banking recruiting, that's just not how it works.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's like really worth calling out for people, is like, you got to start as early as possible, right? But for you though, so like those 2 to 3 months from like June, July, August, when we were just kind of laying the groundwork, like, I mean, what were the things you were doing? I guess did you do another like part-time internship after your veterinary roll-up, like during the semester?
Yeah. So I actually ended up continuing with that and came on with them full time during the summer. And that was because I really wanted to get into the weeds of like acquisition work that they were doing with vet clinics. But of course, on the side, I was treating this program almost as like a college class, and that's what it really was during the summer for me, like this sort of boot camp in a sense, and really like polishing myself to become that candidate that banks really looked at and was appealing to.
Yeah. So essentially, it's kind of like you're doing an internship and then you're doing like summer school part-time on the side, but summer school is like Wall Street Mastermind, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And then like simultaneously, I guess you're doing a bunch of networking, right?
Yes.
Applications. Did you like talk about the networking a bit? Like, did your approach to networking change at all? Or like, how is it any different than what you were doing before?
Yeah, definitely. Part of the program is that like you have tried and true methods of how to reach out to bankers and that have worked time and time again for clients over the years. And so really like this method of how to systematically approach networking and be most efficient with it. Because before I was just sporadically sending out emails to whoever I came across on LinkedIn, right? But you gave me this, system that I could use both on LinkedIn and also just reaching out to people systematically and really being organized about it and how to best go about addressing the calls when I actually got them. So I immediately felt the sense of renewed confidence, I guess, going into these calls and how to like actually carry the conversation and establish more of a rapport rather than just a simple transaction like it was before I joined the program.
Yeah. So these conversations, was it like, were they pretty tough, or is it like tough in the beginning and it got gradually easier? And like, how do you kind of make it kind of what you said, which is like feel not transactional and not sleazy and more of just like a real genuine relationship building type of thing? Because that's the key, right?
Right. Yeah, so definitely, I would say like two things. So one is like, like with anything in life, practice, 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 and the more number of reps you get in, the more and more comfortable you start to get in, get with the routine. And so by like the time I was in the September hopping on a call with like an MD, I could carry the conversation no problem, as opposed to just like at the beginning of the program or when I started recruiting, I would be like, holy, how do I speak to someone so senior at the firm? I would be like pissing my pants, so scared. And then secondly, I had to have a change in mindset, because really you can't go into these calls saying, oh, I expect people to give something to me, because really they're doing something for you. They're doing you a favor. So as much as you can make that time valuable for yourself and also the other party on the other end of this call, that just makes it favorable for both ends.
Right. Makes sense, man. How many do you know how, I mean, you probably tracked this, but like, how many networking calls did you have to do throughout this entire process? Was it like,
Jeez. I'm in the middle of the thing, so I wouldn't go into the actual spreadsheet, but definitely more than a couple hundred calls. And that's out of like literally over 1,000 emails that I sent to people, and that was just the number of responses that I got. And so just the amount of networking you have to do to break into this industry is something that is tough, but something that's so well worth it in the end.
Yeah. I like to ask that question just to give people a sense of the magnitude of the amount.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't think people really understand. Like, I've spoken to so many students where they're like, yeah, I've done a bunch of networking. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, cool. How many people have you reached out to so far? They're like, I've already reached out to 20 people. And I'm like, okay, like that's probably not going to get you very far, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so like most of our clients is kind of what you said, was just like they end up doing hundreds of calls, right? I did another one of these client interviews yesterday. He also did like 200 to 250 calls during his time recruiting. So it's like,
Right.
it's kind of like, you know, the ballpark that we kind of hear a lot. So, so networking was a big part of your summer.
Of course.
Your internship, learning everything you need to learn. I guess aside from networking, the other part that you were really spending time on is just your behavioral interviews and your technical interviews. And I know we, you know, we did like multiple mock interviews throughout, but like, let's talk about the behavioral aspect first. Like, I think the question people always have on the behavioral side is like, behaviorals are easy, right? Just like talking about yourself, like I can do that all day, you know? Or like I hear people talk, I hear people say a lot, it's like, yeah, I'm a pretty confident guy. I'm outgoing, I'm sociable. I know how to tell my story. So like, what's the big deal, right? Like how much better can my answers really be? Like, how are you feeling about your behaviorals coming in? And then like, how are you feeling about your behaviorals now, having come out the other side of the program and the other side of the recruiting process? Like, did your behavioral answers change much or not that much? Or, and what was that process in between?
Yeah, definitely. First, I would say like there's a huge difference between knowing how to ramble and knowing how to speak intelligently. So you know, like I would consider myself like before joining the program like a pretty outgoing guy. You know, pretty comfortable to like speak to people about a range of different topics. But really, you know, you have to keep in mind this: like bankers are really tight on schedule, and they want to hear something that's interestingly and captures their experience, right? So if you know, I'm just going to use the example of tell me about yourself, the question that everyone gets. You know, if they really wanted to just learn about your experiences, they would just read your resume. No need to interview the client, right? So you got to speak in a way that's both, you know, intelligible and easy to understand, but also kind of captures the attention of the person that you're speaking to. So what Wall Street Mastermind, you know, did for me in terms of my behaviorals was that it really gave me this guide about how to break it down into bite-sized kind of sound bites. So like, you know, these are 3 reasons why I'm interested in this bank, or, you know, let me take you through the journey of how I ended up in this seat today. And instead of just turning into a 5-minute spiel about like, you know, all the bunch of things in your life you did since you were born, you know, it turned into like this really tight 1.5-minute answer that I think really perfectly sums up, you know, my journey to finance, while also being able to like build some charisma and rapport with the interviewer.
Got it. So you called it like, you know, sound bites, which is interesting. That's the first time someone's used that description. It's basically like us giving you frameworks to follow, right?
Yeah.
Like how to structure your answers. But I think like the difference between what we do and what, because there are interview guides out there that, you know, go through behavioral questions and whatnot, right? But I feel like the difference between, and you can tell me if you agree with this or not, but what most of the interview guys do is they'll say, okay, so for this question, like this is what you want to say, and for this question, like this is the answer, right? And then but like there are so many people reading the exact same guides, and then they end up with like the exact same answers, and that's what you should do if you don't want to stand out, right?
Right, yeah.
If you want to just sound like everybody else, right? What we try to do is not tell you exactly what to say, because we don't want, I mean, we work with hundreds of students. We don't want everyone to just say exact same things. That wouldn't work. Right. But we give you a framework for, here are the things that you want to think about, or here are the elements that you want to touch on. And then everyone goes and fills in the blanks with their own background and experiences and anecdotes and stories. So everyone has different stories, right? But at least like the structure of how you organize your thoughts is pretty similar across the board. And by the way, these frameworks, they're not like just random frameworks that we just made up. It's honestly just through a lot of trial and error, from seeing hundreds of students go through this process, knowing what they use for their answers, because we edit everyone's answers, right? And then like seeing their results after the fact, like, oh, this person went to like Goldman Sachs, this person went to Morgan Stanley, this person went to Centerview, Evercore, whatever, right? And then like taking the most successful people or the most successful outcomes, and then like you can basically just do some pattern recognition around what's the commonality between all the most successful answers, and then
Right.
success leaves clues, right? And then just like synthesizing that into the frameworks that we teach you guys, and then you can, that way we make sure that, because like I think like the biggest thing that's usually where there's a disconnect, like we hear people tell us all the time, like, yeah, I just went through this interview, I thought it went great, but then like I didn't move on, or I didn't get the offer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And usually when that happens is because there's a disconnect between what the candidate thinks is a good answer versus what the banker is looking for in that answer, right? Like there's a misalignment. But when there's a misalignment, like it's hard for the candidate to know what it is that the banker is looking for, right? They're just giving the banker what they think sounds good or what they think the banker wants to hear, right? But they the banker. So these frameworks are basically giving you this other pieces like, hey, based on the data that we have, these are the things that the bankers want to hear or are typically looking for. So make sure you address these. And then you go and address those. And then now we close that gap between, you know, what the banker is expecting and what you're giving them. And so that's why it works, right? It's like, it's a very
definitely
process. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I just want to build off of that. Like, you know, I'm at the stage where like, I'm an upperclassman, so I've heard like some other underclassmen like come to me and be like, "Oh, can I run this answer by you about like how to answer a behavioral question?" And you know, I've heard the same answer from the guides, like they literally just copy and paste it. But I would say like, you know, on top of, you know, being a tried and true method that differentiates the Wall Street Mastermind program, it's like you get real-time feedback, right? Like as opposed to just like reading a book, right? Like you could take these answers, mold them into yourself, and still keep that personal touch, but also you get the feedback from, you know, people like Sam and you know, the other coaches that say, okay, you know, maybe we can just change the wording of this. Maybe we can change the cadence or delivery of this. And, you know, then you have that, you know, connection building, because so many times in interviewers, you know, minds, they'll, you know, just sit there and smile, just like, you know, keep the pleasantries up. But there's a difference between that and in their mind, like clicking a switch, be like, oh wait, oh shoot, that is interesting. That's what separates this candidate. And so that's what that framework does for a lot of the clients, I find.
Yeah, I think you brought up the feedback aspect, which is huge. Like that was the other thing that's really important in this process is most people, when they work on their behaviorals, they don't get that much feedback, right? Like it's kind of like maybe I like a lot of people will actually like come up with the answers to their behaviors and they won't get any feedback because to them it already sounds good, right? But like behavioral answers always sound good to the person that came up with the answer in the first place because that's why you came up with it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you're trying to sabotage yourself, but like you can't. I was talking about like if you write a essay for like your English class, you're not going to grade your own essay, right? Like it's kind of the same concept. Like you can't be the one to critique your own answers. At most, what people typically do is what you just said, which is like they're underclassmen, they go to an upperclassman like you, and then they're like, hey, can I run this answer by you real quick? And then like you'll probably give them some quick feedback, but probably like nothing, you're not going to spend like hours and hours going through the answer in depth with them. And it's just like, it's not that important to you, right? Quite frankly, like you already have your job. Like you want them to do well, but like you're very busy and you have like a bunch of other stuff that you got to do too, right? So how do you find someone who's going to be like super invested in giving you like the most detailed feedback possible, right? And that's what we really try to do. I mean, we literally will. I mean, how long was your behavioral document? It's probably like 15 pages or something.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had like 20 pages at most, and then you guys went through each question and dissected it. And you know, a further point, you know, when I joined the program, one of the things that concerned me was because a lot of the upperclassmen that were helping me were going to be then, you know, preoccupied with their own jobs. So I was immediately left with no outside resources. I was like, whoa, what do I do from here? And then, you know, the program has a dedicated, you know, members of professional teams that are, you know, their purpose is they're being paid to, you know, help you along this process. And so that's their focus. They put their 101% into all of this.
Yeah, I mean, try finding an upperclassman that will take a 20-page document, single space, and go through back changes and rewrite every single answer for you. No one's going to do that, right?
Right.
Our coaches, like when we do that, when we go through that exercise, it actually takes us like a good 3 to 4 days to like go through everything. Like that's how much time we put into it because it's a time consuming process, right? Just like it takes you a lot of time to write it out the first time, and then it takes us a lot of time to go through it the second time, right? So
Right.
it's a very meticulous and detailed, I guess, system. So that's on the behavioral side, right? Which most people don't realize. I actually say like the behavioral side is the more important side.
Highly underrated. Yep.
It's people always think like the technicals is what's going to make or break you. Like, no, you need to know your technicals, but the behavioral side is actually what's going to make or break you. Because we see
Yep.
people actually mess up a little bit on the technical side and still land offers. Um, but we don't ever see anyone get offers if their behavioral answers are just mediocre. That's just
Right.
what happens. So that's behaviorals, right? Let's talk about technicals for a second. Like, what did you know any of your technicals coming into the program, or were you kind of like starting from scratch?
So like I had bits like of information kind of like spread out, from every different corner of like all the information that you need to know. But like I said before, it was the sense of direction that I was lacking. So in the same way that like a professor might give you like a syllabus at the beginning of a semester, kind of outlines the plan of how are we going to attack this and how are we going to build the foundations first, and then go in a sense that allows you to like build on top of the information that you've already learned. And so what this program did for me was really gave me that sense of direction and how to start from square zero and really build on the knowledge in a way that made sense and go from subject to subject that really connected each other.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there, which is like when you study technicals, actually like there is a logical order of operations in terms of
Right.
what makes sense, because a lot of these concepts build on top of each other. Right? Like if you don't, for example, if you don't understand how the three statements work, like you can't, by definition, you can't understand valuation, right? Or like if you don't understand valuation, like by definition, you cannot understand a lot of the most important inputs to like the M&A model, for example, right? And so it's like a lot of times I see people study and they just kind of like they're all over the place, or they just like, oh, they heard this buzzword DCF. All right, let me go study the DCF, and then like
Yeah.
they haven't studied like the other stuff, like kind of like the foundational or the building blocks that allow you to understand how a DCF even makes sense, and like that's where people kind of mess up, right?
Yeah.
I think the other place that where people mess up on technicals is one, they're just memorizing answers to like very specific questions. Like, oh, I have the 400 questions guide. Let me just like memorize these answers, commit it to memory. Problem is like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many interviews you're going through. It's like at least 3 different firms.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, did you just get like identical questions from the guides, or like very rarely?
Very, very rarely were they repeated like verbatim. So oftentimes what interviewers will do is like, they know these guides exist, so they want to see if you actually understand the material, so they'll switch around the numbers sometimes, or instead of an increase in like liability, they'll say like, what's a decrease in liability? So it kind of catches you off guard, and that's what separates the applicants that really understand the material versus just memorize a script.
Right. So understanding the concepts is key, right? Like for those of you that are listening right now, if you are currently going down the path of like memorizing answers, like just stop. It's just like I'll save you some time. Just stop. Don't do that. It doesn't work. Like you are going to get tripped up in your interviews, even if you get the interviews, and it's going to be a waste of an opportunity, right? You have to understand the underlying concepts, and in terms of like underlying the understanding the underlying concepts, also like I mean, just like anything else you learn, like I think the biggest thing is like you're gonna have a lot of questions, right? Because I mean, Ryan, you even when you were going through the modules, it's like you're going through this boot camp or summer school class or whatever you want to call it. You have a professor teaching this stuff to you in the lecture. Like, doesn't mean you're gonna understand everything on the first try.
Right.
Right? And so like when you have questions, like you need to have someone who can like answer these questions for you.
Right.
which I feel like a lot of people don't really have that.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
what you end up doing is, if you don't have anyone who can answer your questions, then I guess the next best thing you could do is just go online and go to Google and type in whatever your question is, and then open the first 10 search results and, in different tabs, and try to do all of them and see if any of them make sense. And a lot of times it doesn't,
Mm.
right? Because if it didn't make sense when you read it in the guides, and you go find all these other articles and they're just kind of repeating the same thing or written in a similar way, like, it's still not going to make sense to you. Like, usually if you don't understand something, that's when you need like actual human being to like sit down and explain it to you, right? In like
Right. Yeah.
layman's terms. Um,
Mm.
and that's kind of like what you find inside of this program as well, right? Or like,
Yep.
what did you do when you had questions about, your technical questions?
Well, first thing is, you always have available to you within your Slack channel, like the private Slack channel that you could always message individually, like the coaches, and then also, specific mod or channels devoted to technical questions. So people would always, ask questions in that, and not only is it the coaches answering, but it's also, fellow clients and fellow peers that are actually feeding off of that same kind of helping each other out in a sense. And then also just the office hours and also mock interviews. So the thing is about these office hours and mock interviews is that they give you real-time feedback and they answer your questions. It's another person answering your question. So like you said, Sam, it's not just looking it up on Google and getting the same answer 10 times. Someone will actually help you walk through the thought process and break it down in real time for you.
Right. And then like, if you're still confused, the other person they're like sitting across from you and they see that you're so confused. So then they can try to explain it a different way, maybe.
Right.
Like, ask you, why are you so confused? Or like, you can ask follow-up questions. And like, honestly, that's how you learn, right? Like, Bulge Mastermind is not like some groundbreaking thing. I mean, it kind of is in this industry, but like, we are just taking like the model that's been around forever of like, this is how we learn in school. And then we're applying that to like just learning everything you need to learn to get into investment banking. Is like, you have a professor that teaches you everything you need. You have office hours, you can go and ask questions. You have like your classmates and that who can help each other out. And it's like, anytime you need help, you raise your hand. There are things you have to do, assignments you have to do and get feedback on. It's just like, it's very interactive, but like, it's been around for hundreds of years, and so far I don't think anyone's figured out a better way for people to learn new things. So it's like,
right.
But I like the analogy you brought up earlier. Is like, you could buy $100 textbook and just like study that on your own. There's a reason why everyone's paying 6 figures to go to college and not just like buying books and staying at home and studying on your own, right? When you study technicals on your own, sometimes you don't even know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you might read something one time, like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, you're thinking it makes sense to you. But then later, when you try to like answer a question about that concept that you just read about, you realize, oh, actually, I can't answer this question, right? Or like, you might not understand something, but because you didn't even know you don't understand it, you're not even going to go out and look for the answer or ask questions. That's why like the technical channel you mentioned earlier, where you said like, it's not just the coaches answering questions, but it's like your peers as well. The reason why we really love that is because some people don't actually ask that many questions in there, but we know they're still learning because they're seeing the questions that other people are asking.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you see questions that other people ask that you didn't think to ask, but once you see the other person ask it, you're like, oh yeah, I wonder what the answer is to that. Like, I don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still learning just by like being in that environment, right? That is like 10 times better than you trying to come up with all the questions yourself, because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I think that's like a pretty good, honestly, detailed walkthrough of like all the things we worked on. So we did obviously like, fix up application materials, resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile. You learned how to network. You worked on your behaviorals. You learned your technicals, and you did all this in the span of like 2 to 3 months, like you said, which is like, honestly, probably like, that's pretty standard for someone in our program, right? What was and then you said you got throughout this process, you ended up getting 3 interviews, was it?
It was like more than three, like four or five.
Okay. You got 4 or 5 interviews, so 4 or 5 different firms, right?
Yeah.
And then how was that? Let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously, like, it's not like a lot of times it's not like you're gonna get the offer on your very first interview. That's why, like, ideally you're gonna get multiple interviews, right?
Right.
But like, what was that process like? So you mentioned earlier, like, your first interview was with MS, was super exciting, right? And then that one, what happened with that? Just didn't pan out. Did you like make it to Super Day or?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough, so I ended up having my first round with MS, like I think one weekday, I forget when it was exactly, but and then the next day I got invited to the Super Day, which was the week after that. And then I got through the Super Day, and then that same day I got an interview for a first round for another firm, and that kind of same rhythm just kind of started just happening. So it was like you said, like the floodgates kind of opened once September came around. But like again, like similar to what I said about the networking calls, like getting in reps and practicing. So I remember before my MS Super Day, I had more than 10 mock interviews, including with people from the Wall Street Mastermind. And this is something that also that's really helpful. Like not only did I do mocks with you and all of the coaches, but also with former or not former clients, but like fellow peers, where we gave each other feedback. And so that kind of sense of camaraderie again is really reflected in this program. And so by the time my final interview had come around with like by like November, I was pretty confident in terms of how to answer certain questions. And of course, there's always possibility of curveballs, but I would say 90% of the possible interview material I had done pat and felt really comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And then obviously, like, you got your first offer in, I think you said September,
October.
no, October. You got your
Yeah.
first offer in October, but then you had like another, which you were very happy about. Obviously, you were
Yeah.
excited. It's always great to like get your first offer. Just like such a relief, right?
Yeah.
Because you know you're not gonna like walk away from this grind of a process empty-handed. But then you had like another offer that you were waiting on that was even higher up on your list, right?
Mhm.
And then so there's a lot of like, we had to like navigate through how to manage the different timelines and processes.
Right.
That was kind of tricky, right? So like, can you kind of talk about kind of what we had to do there, like in terms of managing that?
Yeah. So, I could definitely say if, all things equal, if I just been alone in this process, and let's say I was in the same situation, I would have freaked out. I have no kind of support system through this, and definitely is reflective of like the larger thing of like feeling like you're alone in this process, which definitely was like something like a feeling that I had before joining the program. But that's another conversation. But any question I had with regards to how to form this email to the HR recruiter, how to best to go about managing these timelines and being respectful about other firms, and but also like not being like blatantly like, oh, I'm waiting on another firm. So navigating that was really tough, but also was really helpful to get your live feedback and your honest thoughts.
Yeah, because I think like people don't really understand how stressful this situation is until they actually like experience it themselves, right?
Yeah.
But for those of you who are like lucky enough to get multiple offers, or or at least have multiple interviews, you might get to the point where you have an offer and it's expiring on a certain date, and then you have this like other interview process that is not finished yet, but like that's the one that you maybe is your top choice, or you want more than your current offer. And so like, how do you manage that? Like, how do you, maybe try to get this firm to move a little bit faster so that you can, hear back before you have to respond to your first offer? And then like, because you don't want to lose the first offer without having anything else lined up, right? And so like, how do you manage that whole thing? And like, how often can you follow up with the firm, with HR, with your banking contacts? Like, because you don't want to be annoying, but you also don't want to be like super passive about it, right? How do you
Right.
phrase your email, or like write it in a way that's, respectful, but like not overly pushy? Like, there's just a lot that like goes into even just that process. Because like,
Right.
Like managing these timelines, like I mean, that probably lasted what, like a good 2 weeks or so, maybe. I don't
Oh
remember.
yeah, 2 weeks at least. It was like at least a couple weeks. Um, and it was really tough, like you said. Like it was all like game theory stuff. Like you didn't know how the other party was going to respond. But really, what Wall Street Mastermind did for me was like act as a sounding board. So any questions that I thought, oh, it might be too stupid to ask like upperclassmen, I was never afraid to ask you guys, and you guys always came through with like advice and candid information.
Right. Because like we went as far as like figuring out, okay, like when is this firm going to be done interviewing other candidates, and when are they sending out offers, and where does that sit relative to like your exploding deadline, and like you said, game theory, like what should we ask for, what should we tell them, so on and so forth. Like what information do we share and what information do we withhold? There's just a lot that goes into it, and like for someone that's going through it the first time, it can be very intimidating. Just like it's a big deal because you don't want to mess it up because it's your career. But like, how do I make sure I'm like putting my best foot forward, right? So it's good to like have someone that's seen these situations many times before, and just like, again, we don't, and you can attest to this, like we don't tell you what to do
Right.
necessarily, but we're a sounding board for you where we just kind of like play out the different scenarios, and like here are the pros and cons, and here's the risk, and here's the reward. And a lot of it comes down to your own personal risk tolerance too, in terms of like what you want to do, right?
Right.
It's like not financial advice, right? Like we can't give you financial advice. I'm not going to tell you what stock to buy, but like we can analyze it, and then like you can make your own decision, right?
Yeah, you still gain that sense of independence, and you are still completely in control of what you do. It's just you guys present all the options, and some of which personally I didn't even know was a possibility. So definitely opening my eyes, but also in the end, I was still able to make that decision and call for myself.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the final outcome in the end? Like what was the offer that you ended up accepting?
Yeah, so I ended up going with Barclays, which was crazy in my opinion. Even though looking back at it, if you told me like at the beginning of the year that I would be able to like end up with the bulge bracket offer when already a lot of my peers had already known that they wanted to do investment banking since they were born or at least entering into college. Um, I would not believe you. I would call you fake. But right now I'm sitting in front of you and having gotten that offer, and this grinding entirely feels worth it. And I could say it's like one of the best feelings in the world and most accomplished feelings in the world, because you honestly like worked for that kind of outcome.
That was like the dream outcome, right? It's like everyone wants to end up at either like a bulge bracket or a elite boutique bank, right? And
Yeah.
this is rarefied air, honestly, because these bulge bracket banks or even elite boutiques, like typically they're only accepting like 1 to 2% of their applicant pool, right? And so it's like very, very hard. And your school is not a target school for Barclays, right? So it's like even harder, right? You're
Yeah.
competing against a lot of the Ivy League schools, and a lot of the top public schools that have business programs, and I mean you guys are more liberal arts, right? And so that is an amazing outcome, but I think that is the whole point, though, is that most people come into this program with some sort of expectation in terms of like what they think is a fair outcome based on where they're at,
Mhm.
and it's our job to like elevate that. Because like if you just come in and you just get the outcome that you were kind of thinking you should be able to get anyway, then like what's the point, right?
Mm.
The whole point is like, and this is what we always tell people too. Like people are like, well, I think I'll be able to get into banking on my own. Well, yeah, you might be able to. I mean, shoot, Ryan, you might have been able to get into banking on your own. I don't know. You might have been, right? But it might not have been at a bulge bracket bank, right? And so
Yeah.
even if for a lot of people, like it might be the difference between not getting in at home versus getting in, and that's obviously a huge difference. But like even for someone like you, let's say like maybe your expectation was like, oh, I would have gotten into a middle market bank if I did this on my own, and then we got you into a bulge bracket bank, like that is still a huge difference, right?
Right.
Like in the long run, I'm saying like in the short run, maybe not. Like, oh yeah, like analysts get paid about the same at a bulge bracket and a middle market, but like in terms of exit opportunities, in terms of like career trajectory, in terms of like what you're able to do afterwards, like if you want to go to the buy side, whatever, like it's just different. And that is
Yep.
worth a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just like, I think like not enough people understand that. Not enough
Mm.
people like look at the big picture or think long term. They're just like, oh, but I just do it on my own. I like save a little bit of money right now. It's like, well, what is it costing you? By getting an inferior outcome, what is it costing you? It's costing you more than what you're saving right now, right? It's like being penny wise and pound foolish, really, right?
Right.
So anyway, last question for you before we wrap up. Like, do you have like one piece of advice for our listeners? Like maybe people who are in a similar situation as you, maybe they go to a non-target or semi-target for certain banks, but not others. Maybe they like started kind of late. They didn't decide until sophomore year they want to do banking. Like, was there like one piece of advice that maybe someone gave you along the way that just like helped you tremendously that you want to kind of pass on to other people?
I'll give one piece of advice, which kind of stems into like two, I guess. So the one would be find a mentor. Find someone who'll give you a sense of direction and who's been through the process, and that'll help you tremendously. It's like, people always say, oh, you have, this generation has the fingertips of information at their hands because of the internet and everything. But in the same way that, an explorer is lost in a cave without a light, you need something to guide you. And then in tandem with that is like, you need to keep your head up, right? Like this whole process was, for me, I could say personally, it was an emotional roller coaster. Just like you felt down in the gutter one day and then you felt like you were about to cry out of happiness the other day. But the one constant is your grit and your determination, and don't let like emotions in the heat of the moment determine your outcome and determine what you're going to do next. So yeah, that's the piece of advice I would give to everyone listening right now.
That's funny that you say that. I never took you for like the super emotional type. Like you seem very like even keel, at least when we're interacting. But I'm sure like inside you're going through like
yeah, internally, yeah.
But no, I like what you said there about like, how this generation has all the information at their fingertips, right? It's like it's the argument that people make about like, well, everything's on Google already, right? Everything I need is on Google and YouTube. I just go find it on Google and YouTube. Yeah, everything is at your fingertips, like in terms of information.
Mm-hmm.
Your competition has the exact same information at their fingertips. So it's like that's not an advantage. That's not like a competitive advantage anymore. You're not competing against your parents back when they didn't have internet, right? It's like you're competing against other students who have all the same information as you, and like you need to like figure out how else you can get an edge that other people don't have, right?
Right.
Having a better mentor than your competition does, that is a huge advantage, right? So anyway, that's great advice. Guys, we're gonna wrap it up here, but before we go, if you're in a similar situation, maybe you're starting a little bit late, maybe you didn't decide you want to do banking until sophomore year, perhaps even later, maybe you don't go to target school, whatever the case may be, if you think that you might be interested in getting our help, reach out to us. You can schedule a free virtual coffee chat with our team at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we'd be happy to hop on with you, just like ask you some questions, learn more about what exactly your situation is, because to be completely honest, like we can't work with everybody. Like we don't actually work with people that we can't help. We also started doing this thing where we're like offering money back guarantees. And like, obviously we're not going to do that with people that we know just aren't going to get the outcome, right? So we try to only take on clients that we know we can help win. And that way, like you get a great outcome, we get a great outcome. And so if we don't think we can help you, we'll be very honest with you. We're going to tell you that. We're not going to BS you. We're just going to give you some advice instead and tell you like what else we think you should be doing. But either way, I think you take a lot from this call. So again, www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. Okay. So that'll be it. Ryan, thank you again for taking so much time out of your day to talk to us. This was really, really helpful and hopefully insightful for our listeners as well. And again, huge congrats on an amazing outcome. I'm really happy for you. And, I know you've been kind of like basking in the afterglow of this for the last few months, but continue to enjoy it, and good luck with finals. I'm guessing you're going through that right now. And let us know if there's anything else we can support you with, as you approach your internship, and just look forward to seeing all the success you have this upcoming summer, man.
Thanks so much, man. Couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's my pleasure. All right, guys, that'll be it for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk soon. Be back with more of these interviews for you guys in the near future. All right, bye.